There's a moment you may know all too well. The moment when you finally stopped explaining yourself, when you stopped picking up the phone, stopped replying to the messages, stopped rehearsing arguments in the shower, stopped defending your reality to someone who was never going to accept it anyway. And in that silence, something shifted, not just inside of them, inside of you. Because for the first time in a long time, the noise stopped and you could finally hear your own voice again. If you have lived through the confusion of loving someone who could turn warmth into cruelty in a single breath, someone who made you doubt your own memory, your own emotions, even your own sanity, then what I am about to walk you through will feel less like information and more like recognition, like someone finally putting words to something you have carried alone for years. Before we go any deeper, I want to invite you to subscribe to this channel because what we explore here is not surface level comfort. This is real psychological insight, the kind that helps you understand what happened to you, protects you from manipulation you did not even know you were vulnerable to, and gently guides you back toward emotional freedom and peace. If you are ready to stop surviving and start healing, stay with me because you belong here, and everything I am about to share is for you. Let's begin with what actually happens on the other side when you choose silence, when you choose boundaries, when you choose yourself. Because understanding this does not just satisfy your curiosity, it dissolves the guilt that keeps pulling you back. In the beginning, when your responses simply stop appearing, there is confusion. Not the ordinary confusion of missing someone, but something deeper and more disorienting for a person with strong narcissistic traits. You have to understand how they experience the relationship. To someone who relies heavily on external validation to regulate their sense of self, you are not just a partner or a family member or a friend. You were a mirror. You reflected back to them a version of themselves they could not generate from within. Psychologists often describe this need as narcissistic supply, the steady stream of attention, reaction, admiration, or even conflict that helps stabilize an unstable inner world. And when you go quiet, that supply does not slowly fade, it vanishes. So the first thing they feel is not sadness, it is disbelief. The script they have relied on for years suddenly stops working. The buttons that always produced a reaction now produce nothing. And in that nothingness, they experience a kind of psychological vertigo because your predictable responses were part of how they kept themselves feeling real. Meanwhile, on your side of that silence, something entirely different is beginning. Your nervous system, which has been running on high alert for so long, is finally getting its first taste of stillness. It may not feel like peace yet. It might feel like anxiety, like guilt, like the unbearable urge to check if they are okay. That is not weakness. That is a body that has been conditioned to associate their approval with safety, slowly learning that it can survive without it. As the confusion settles and the silence continues, it gives way to something more active. Escalation. This is the stage that catches so many people off guard because it can look like sudden intensity, even sudden affection. When the usual methods stop producing a response, a person with these traits will often increase the volume rather than change the message. The texts multiply. The calls come at odd hours. There may be dramatic declarations, sudden crises, urgent needs that only you can supposedly solve. And I want you to hear this clearly because it matters for your healing. This escalation is usually not about you as a person. It is about the restoration of control. You represent equilibrium to a dysregulated system, and the escalation is the frantic attempt to pull that equilibrium back into place. Understanding this protects you because the escalation is designed to feel like proof that you matter, when in truth, it is often proof of how much they relied on your reactions to feel stable. And here is where your growth becomes visible, even to you. every hour you hold your boundary, you are teaching your own brain a new truth: that the discomfort of not responding is temporary, but the freedom on the other side of it is lasting. You are not being cold, you are being clear. There is a profound difference, and your nervous system is beginning to learn it. When escalation fails, when the increased pressure still does not restore their sense of control, we reach something psychologists refer to as narcissistic injury. This is the wounded ego, and to understand it, you have to understand how fragile the grandiose exterior often is. Beneath the confidence, the charm, the superiority, there frequently lives a deeply unstable sense of self, one that cannot tolerate the experience of being unimportant or dismissed. Your silence communicates something their psychology is not built to absorb. It communicates that they do not have the power they believed they had over your emotional world. And that realization does not register as ordinary disappointment. It registers as a threat to their very identity. This is why reactions at this stage can seem so disproportionate. A simple boundary gets treated like an act of war. Your quiet self-respect gets interpreted as cruelty. But notice what is happening for you in the same moment. You are discovering that your peace does not depend on their permission. You are learning that you can witness someone's distress without absorbing it, without rushing to fix it, without abandoning yourself to soothe them. That is not heartlessness. That is the beginning of differentiation. The psychological ability to remain yourself even when someone else wants you to dissolve. The wounded ego rarely stays quiet, and this is where many survivors face their hardest test. Because injury, when it cannot be soothed, often converts into rage, blame, and retaliation. This is the stage of the smear campaign, the sudden rewriting of history, the version of events where you become the villain and they become the victim. They may reach out to mutual friends, to family, to anyone who will listen, painting a picture that bears little resemblance to what you actually lived. And I know how deeply this wounds, because after everything, you may still carry the instinct to defend your name, to make people see the truth. Let me offer you something to hold on to here. The smear campaign is not evidence of your failure. It is often evidence of how completely your silence disrupted their control. When someone cannot reach you directly, they sometimes try to reach you through others, through your reputation, through your relationships, hoping the distress will travel back to you and pull you into engagement. The people who truly know you will see through it in time, and the ones who do not were perhaps never truly yours to convince. Your task in this stage is not to win the narrative. It is to become so grounded in your own reality that their version simply cannot move you. Every time you resist the urge to explain, to defend, to re-engage, you strengthen something within you that no smear campaign can touch. Your inner knowing, your unshakable sense of what actually happened. That is the foundation of trauma recovery, learning to trust your own perception again after years of having it questioned. When rage burns out and retaliation fails to reel you back, something softer often emerges, and it is far more dangerous precisely because it is gentle. This is the stage of desperation, and it wears the mask of tenderness. Psychologists sometimes call it hoovering, named for the way it tries to vacuum you back into the relationship. Suddenly, the person who blamed you becomes the person who misses you. The apologies arrive, sometimes the most convincing apologies you have ever heard. There may be promises of change, memories of the good times, moments of the very warmth that made you fall for them in the first place. And this is where I need you to be especially gentle with yourself, because if you feel yourself softening here, it does not mean you are foolish. It means you are human, and it means you are experiencing the powerful pull of what we call a trauma bond. This bond forms through intermittent reinforcement. the unpredictable alternation of pain and affection, which paradoxically creates a stronger attachment than consistent kindness ever could. Your brain became wired to hope, to wait for the return of the good version, and the hoovering exploits exactly that wiring. Knowing this is your protection. When the tenderness returns, you can recognize it not as proof that things have changed, but as the same pattern wearing a new face. And your healing shows itself in your ability to feel the pull and still choose yourself, to acknowledge the longing without obeying it. That is not deprivation. That is you, finally becoming the author of your own choices. If the desperate reaching does not work, if the intermittent kindness cannot restore what your silence took away, the person often moves into a period of genuine instability. This is important to understand with clarity rather than triumph, because for someone who depends on external validation to regulate their internal state, the sustained loss of supply can produce real psychological distress. Not the performed distress of the earlier stages, but something more disorganized, harder to hide. Their emotional world was scaffolded by your reactions, and without that scaffolding, the underlying fragility becomes more visible. Now, I want to be careful and honest here because responses vary enormously from person to person. Some individuals experience this as a painful, disorienting emptiness. Others manage it by quickly seeking new sources of validation elsewhere. There is no single guaranteed outcome, and anyone who promises you certainty is selling you a story rather than the truth. What I can tell you is that their internal experience is not your responsibility to manage or repair. That may be one of the hardest lessons of your recovery, especially if you spent years as the emotional regulator for someone who never learned to soothe themselves. Your compassion, that beautiful capacity that likely made you a target in the first place, does not have to mean self-sacrifice. You can wish someone well and still refuse to be their medicine. And notice how much steadier you have become by this point. The urges that once felt overwhelming now pass through you more quickly. The silence that once felt like withdrawal now feels increasingly like relief. Your nervous system is recalibrating, learning that safety can come from within, that you are the source of your own regulation now. And then eventually comes the final movement, though final is perhaps the wrong word, because human beings are complex and patterns rarely resolve in tidy conclusions. For some, this looks like acceptance of lost control, a quiet recognition that you are no longer accessible, that the old dynamics will not return. For others, it looks like moving on to a new source of supply, sometimes with a speed that can feel devastating to witness. And for some, it remains a lingering emptiness, an inability to find lasting fulfillment, because the underlying pattern was never truly about you at all. I know how painful it can be to imagine them simply replacing you, as though you were interchangeable, as though everything you shared meant nothing. But I want to gently reframe that pain for you. Their ability to move on quickly is not a measure of your worth. It is a reflection of a way of relating to others that treats people as functions rather than as whole human beings. The fact that you cannot imagine treating someone that way is not your weakness. It is your depth. It is proof that you love with a fullness they may never access. And by the time you reach this understanding, something remarkable has usually happened within you. You have stopped tracking their stages entirely. You began this journey wanting to know what they were feeling, and somewhere along the way, the question quietly changed. It became, what am I feeling? What do I need? Who am I becoming now that I am no longer organized around someone else's chaos? That shift, from watching them to returning to yourself, is the true heart of recovery. And it deserves to be understood far more deeply than we often allow. Because here is what almost no one tells you about the silence you chose. It was never actually about them at all. The silence was never a weapon aimed outward, never revenge, never a punishment designed to make them suffer. It was a boundary drawn inward, a door closed gently but firmly so that you could finally hear yourself think. And this distinction changes everything about how you heal. Because when you understand that your silence was an act of self protection rather than aggression, the guilt begins to loosen its grip. You were not being cruel, you were being loyal, at last, to yourself. There is a particular kind of grief that lives underneath all of this, and I do not want to move past it too quickly because your healing depends on honoring it. You are not only grieving a person, you are grieving the version of them you hoped they could become. You are grieving the future you imagined. You are grieving the time, the energy, the pieces of yourself you handed over, believing they would be cherished. That grief is real and it deserves your tenderness rather than your judgment. So many survivors rush to feel better, to be over it, to prove they have healed, and in doing so, they abandon themselves all over again. But you do not have to perform recovery. You only have to allow it. And allowing it means letting yourself feel the ache without letting the ache pull you backward. What I find most extraordinary about the people who walk this path is how often they mistake their sensitivity for the reason they were hurt, when in truth, their sensitivity is the very thing that will heal them. Your capacity to feel deeply, to empathize, to attune to another person's needs, these were not flaws that made you vulnerable. They were gifts that were exploited by someone who could not honor them. And now those same gifts, turned toward yourself, become the instruments of your restoration. Imagine offering yourself the patience you offered them. Imagine listening to your own needs with the same attentiveness you once reserved for reading their moods. Imagine attuning to your own nervous system, noticing when you feel safe and when you do not, and honoring that information instead of overriding it. This is what it means to come home to yourself after narcissistic abuse. It is not about becoming hard or closed or cynical. It is about becoming discerning, about keeping your open heart while finally installing a door with a lock that only you control. And as you continue forward, there is something else beginning to stir, something that often surprises people in the later stretches of their healing, a return of a self they thought was lost forever.